So today we have a very exciting video. This video has been such a long time in the making that I am so excited to finally get around to filming it. And that is reading and rating the entire long list for the Women's Prize for Fiction. Now, let's just say it did take me a fair while to get through these books. I feel like all I've been reading recently is the long list, so I am so happy to finally reach the end of it, and I have read some amazing books in the process. So I thought I would run through my list from worst to best of all the books in the Women's Prize for Fiction long list. So let's get into it, because I feel like this is going to be a fairly long video. I'm looking at my big stack of books here. There are 16 books in total. So like I said, I will start with my worst book out of the list all the way through to my favourite book. So in last place at number 16 is The Dog of the North by Elizabeth Mackenzie. And I did a whole reading blog on this at the time of reading it, and I was just so disappointed. So this book is about a woman named Penny who has recently just gone through a divorce, and it's safe to say is feeling a bit lost in the world. There are so many different storylines in this book that I actually struggle to describe what it is about. Like, for example, she makes a new friend who lives in his office and has a camper van named The Dog of the North, or her wacky grandma who is under investigation because there are human remains in her garden, or her granddad who has an evil second wife, or her parents who have gone missing in the Australian outback. There are so many threads to this story, which left me feeling like I never really knew which storyline I was supposed to be focusing on. And I feel like every storyline in this book was so surface level. There was never any real satisfying conclusion for me to any of the storylines. I would much have preferred if she picked maybe one or two storylines to really focus on, delve deep into, and then have a satisfying ending. But yeah, I just felt there was such opportunity for some really exciting and engaging storylines. But because there was so much going on, nothing really hit the mark for me. So unfortunately, this was my least favourite book out of the long list. So coming in at number 15 is I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel. And I must say, I was not a fan of this book. It's about a woman who has an affair with an older, successful man. This man is having affairs with lots of other women. But this main character, she's very bored in her life, bored in her relationship, and she becomes obsessed with this man that she's having an affair with. And in turn, she becomes obsessed with one of the women that this man is also sleeping with. This other woman is an influencer, a famous influencer. She is rich, she is beautiful, and our main character becomes obsessed with stalking her online and finding out as much as she can about her life. I feel like I'm really not a fan of these sort of unhinged woman books. I felt like the main character just felt so one-dimensional to me, and I didn't really understand why she was so obsessed. I felt like it wasn't really explained in this book too much. I remember when I read the reviews for this book, I saw someone say that it just felt like a really unsubtle book, and I would completely agree with that. It just felt super on the nose, just super one-dimensional. I felt like the main character wasn't fleshed out too much, and I felt there was just such a focus on highlighting the stark difference between our main character and this rich, beautiful influencer. But it just felt, yeah, really unsubtle and really on the nose for me. So I did not gel with the characters at all in this book. So it was not for me. So next up is Children of Paradise by Camilla Gradova. And this book is about a young girl who starts working at a really old cinema full of sort of young misfits who all have this really tight bond and are sort of united by their love of film. They all stay there all night long watching films, and this girl, this our main character, really wants to be a part of this group and sort of let in, and eventually she is, and they all become really close over working really long shifts. And there are some weird goings on in the cinema because it is so old. And when I read the blurb for this book, I thought this was going to be sort of like a haunted cinema, and I think there were some elements where there were some there was some mystery surrounding the cinema. For example, there was like a hidden room and then a bit of magical realism in there, but not really. I just felt like it could have been played on so much more, and it could have been a really haunting, mysterious, scary cinema. So I just felt like they could have gone a bit further with it, and that's why it's quite low down on my list, just because I was just expecting a bit more suspense from the cinema. I felt like it really could have been played on a lot more than it was. Next on my list is Homesick by Jennifer Croft, and this is about two sisters, Zoe and Amy, growing up and their relationship with each other. At a really young age, Zoe becomes very ill and is in and out of hospital, and this does affect their relationship. They go from being super close, and because of the illness, but also just because of growing up, so many secrets form between the sisters, and where once they knew everything about each other, now it seems like they know nothing about each other. This book is from the perspective of Amy and how she deals with everything, and how she is forced to grow up so quickly. She really exceeds intellectually, and because of this, she is sent off to college at the young age of 15, and this is detrimental to her mental health. I think what's interesting about this book is that it was originally written in Spanish, but then was translated to English, and was sort of labelled as a memoir. So a lot of this book is diary snippets taken from the author, and it's written in really short chapters, so this does make sense. But because of this, I felt like these short snippets that we're getting, I felt like I wasn't really getting the full story, or I wasn't fully immersed in the story, which therefore maybe not as connected to the characters as I would have liked to have been. I was reading that some editions have pictures and stuff of the author growing up that relate to these diary entries, which I would have absolutely loved to have seen in this one. I felt like it really would have added to the story and really made me feel more connected to the characters. So overall, I thought this was a good book, but I just didn't feel super connected to the plotline and super connected to the characters. So this is why it didn't make the cut to some of my absolute favourite books in the list. Then at number 12, we have Cursed Bread by Sophie McIntosh. This is a fairly short book, but I must say this book took me quite a while to get into. It didn't pick up for me until like the last 20 pages or something. This book is about a young affluent couple who moved to a small town, and this book focuses on a young baker, a woman who runs the bakery with her husband, and this woman becomes obsessed with the wife who moves to the town. This book is actually based on a true story of a mass poisoning in a French village in the 1950s, which I found this out at the end, and it did make the story a lot more interesting for me, because a lot of this book is sort of shrouded in mystery, and it is all sort of leading up to this last part of the book, these last sort of 20 pages. So in the beginning it was quite slow. I didn't really know what was going on or what was the point. So yeah, I think the last 20 pages of this book were amazing and so suspenseful and so dramatic. But before then, I was a tiny bit bored, and yeah, it just took me so long to get into, and that's why it's fairly low down in the list. Next up is Stone Blind by Natalie Haynes, and I was so excited to read this book because I just love a Greek mythology book. But this one, it was okay. It definitely was not one of the best Greek mythology books that I've ever read, but it was a good solid book and I did enjoy it. This is a mythological story surrounding Medusa, and she is the only mortal living on this deserted beach with her two sisters. They are Gorgons and feared by many. They are seen as monsters. But one day when Medusa is assaulted in Athene's temple by another god, Athene then punishes her and turns her hair into snakes and turns her vision so that whoever she looks upon will turn to stone. And because of this, because Medusa doesn't want to hurt anyone, she sort of accepts this solitary life where she becomes blind. She puts a blindfold over her eyes. So this is the main story, but there are also lots of other threads and narratives that sort of intermingle to make this plot. And I did enjoy it. I love reading about sort of the gods in the sky, so to speak, and their sort of daily arguments and troubles. I find that really interesting. but for some reason this book didn't really stick in my mind and it wasn't that memorable to me. So that's why it's number 11 in this list. I did enjoy it though, a good solid book, and if you do like Greek mythology, then I would still definitely recommend reading this book. I still thought it was a really interesting take on the story of Medusa, so definitely worth a read if you're into that. So next up is my 10th book in the list, and to be honest, I feel like everything after this I really enjoyed, and I found it so hard to put these in any sort of order because I honestly enjoyed them all. So in number 10 is Pod by Lillian Poole, and this was the first book that I read in the list, and I also did a reading vlog on this book. But this book is about a spinner dolphin named E, and she can't perform in the same way as the other dolphins because she suffers from a type of deafness, which leaves her feeling really bitter and angry, and ultimately results in her leaving her pod to sort of go out into the big dark ocean by herself. The one thing that I really loved about this book was the character development. E starts off, like I said, really angry, resentful, but through the different trials and problems that she has in the sea going out by herself, she becomes really strong and is able to form these loving bonds with other sea life. And I just really enjoyed that element so much. At the beginning, I was unsure whether I would enjoy this book because it did feel like a bit of info dumping at the beginning, like there was so much information, and this author has obviously done her research on the sea and sea life and ways of living, which I did really appreciate. And in the long run, I think that sort of info dumping at the beginning did pay off and did make the story a lot stronger. And this book does split out and focus on some different sea life. And I loved learning about how they interact with the sea, with other sea life, with their surroundings. So it was a really insightful book, really highlighting the sea and its beauty and all the magical living things in there. But I absolutely love the main character E and her character development. That was the highlight of this book for me. Then number 9 on the list is Memphis by Tara M. Stringfellow. And this book is centered around a family living in Memphis. This book spans over around 70 years, focusing on 3 generations. It talks about Hazel, then Hazel's daughter Miriam, then Miriam's daughter, I think her name is Joan. So it focuses on 3 generations, and I just love this kind of book. I love a family saga. I love seeing how Hazel's actions will then filter down to affect Joan growing up, and they don't even really know it, but it shows this cycle and these generations. Each person in this story has their own set of dreams and troubles they have to overcome. This book is mostly focused around Joan growing up and her attempt to sort of break this cycle and follow her dreams, because her mum and grandmother have had to give up so much that you're really just fighting for Joan to like go and succeed, go and do what you want to do, because this book is set in Memphis. There is so much racism, so much police brutality, that there are so many heartbreaking moments in this book that you're just like, go Joan, go and get your happiness. So I love this book so much. I loved the writing. I thought it was an amazing piece of sort of historical fiction. There was so many brilliant moments of family love and perseverance that, yeah, I really recommend this book. I loved it. So yeah. Next up, number 8, we're getting into the really good ones now. These are the ones that I absolutely loved. So we've got The Bandit Queens by Perini Sharaf. And this book surprised me because for some reason I didn't think I was going to enjoy it. I'm not sure why, but quite the opposite. I absolutely loved it. So this book is about a woman named Gita who lives quite a solitary life after her husband abruptly, randomly leaves her. She doesn't know where he's gone. But because of this husband's abrupt departure of the small village, there is a rumour going around that she has killed him. And because of this, people sort of fear her. They don't really want to interact with her until one day her neighbour comes to her house and says, because you've killed your husband, will you help me kill my husband? This book is so funny, and there are so many light-hearted moments in this book, which you wouldn't think from what I've just said, but I loved the humour in this book, and there are so many sad books, really heartbreaking sad books in this list, but this felt like sort of like a nice relief in the midst of it all. Don't get me wrong, there were some still really heartbreaking, sad moments in this book. It talked about domestic abuse, assault, loneliness. There are so many really sad moments in this book, but I just loved the messaging behind this book. It was about women coming together, helping each other to sort of take back their future and overcome oppression. I thought it was a great book, really well-rounded, loved the writing, and if you're after a little bit of a funny, light-hearted read mixed with some really important topics, then I recommend this one. I loved it. Then number 7 on my list is Wandering Souls by Cecile Pin. I remember I read this book in a day. I could not put it down. I was so engaged in the story. It's about a Vietnamese family who go and seek refuge in Hong Kong after the war. So 3 of the siblings go out on the boat with their parents, and other siblings gonna follow closely behind. However, unfortunately, the rest of their family do not make it. They die on the boat. And this leaves these 3 siblings, these 3 young siblings, to fend for themselves. And eventually they end up getting refuge in the UK. And so we see these siblings sort of struggle to integrate into society and struggle to maintain their relationships as a family. I thought this book was so heartbreaking and really just shone a light on how dangerous it is for these people to seek refuge and to just feel safe in their home, which a lot of us take for granted. So this book I found really hard hitting. It's really centered around grief and identity, and it's sort of like a coming of age sort of book as you watch these young siblings grow up and sort of try to find their way in the world. And I feel like the author wrote this in such a beautifully simplistic way that really let the story shine. So it felt really poetic and sad and solemn, which is definitely the mood that this book warranted. So I thought it was such a success and I loved it. And coming in at number 6, I feel like my top 6 books in this list are books that I absolutely adored. I found it so hard to pick between them because honestly, I love them all. They are some new all-time favourite books for me. Number 6 on my list is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. And I feel like a lot of people love this book because this book actually won the Women's Prize for Fiction. I didn't look who won until I put my books in order. Somehow I managed to miss who the winner was. I got no spoilers. But afterwards I went on, I looked, and this was the winner. And I can completely see why. I thought it was such a success. I absolutely loved it. It is about a boy who is nicknamed Demon Copperhead, and he is born to a single mum living in a trailer park. His mum suffers with really bad addiction and he forms strong bonds with his neighbours, but he is in and out of foster care throughout his whole childhood, so it meant he had a really tumultuous growing up. We watch Demon grow up and form new relationships which have really scary comparisons to the relationship he had with his mum. And I feel like as a reader, you just watch on helplessly as his life is sort of already panned out for him before he's even born. And so in this way, it's such a sad book. You are really rooting for Demon. He is such a lovable character. But this book is also centered around the opioid crisis, and you just see how it damages lives beyond repair, and this affects Demon's life so heavily. You just watch as a series of events happen that just mean that he ends up really desperate and really lonely. Like I said, you just love Demon right from the offset, so you just want the best for him. I feel like as soon as I started reading this book, I knew I was going to love it. The writing immediately appealed to me. I was immediately gripped in the story, and it's a fairly long one, which I just loved. I love feeling like you're really immersed in the story and you can get a good chunk of their life. And I just loved reading about Demon's life, although it was just so sad as he gets knocked down again and again and again. But yeah, I can completely see why this won the Women's Prize for Fiction. It was such a success. It was based on Charles Dickens, David Copperfield, and how poverty in society really is detrimental to children's lives. So I know that she took inspiration from that. So now I would absolutely love to read David Copperfield because I've never read it before. So I would love to read and see the comparisons. But yeah, love this book so much. So if the lighting has changed, I have just turned the light on to hopefully make it a bit brighter. But coming in at number 5 is Fire Rush by Jacqueline Crooks. And I just loved this book. It's set in the 1980s in London with a Jamaican community, and the main character is called Yamie. And Yamie is obsessed with music and dancing, and she practically lives at this place called The Crypt, where they go and dance to dub reggae music every week. She lives with her dad, who she has a very strained relationship with after her mum died when she was very young. But in this community, there are so many different characters that shape Yamie's life, some for the better and a lot for the worse. Racism from the police is so present in this story and takes away some really important people in Yamie's life. And because of this, she sort of seeks solitude in a very dangerous group. And ultimately this results in her trying to escape and seek solitude in Jamaica. I love this book. I thought it was so authentic. It felt so vibrant and full of life. The author uses some Jamaican dialect and slang, which I just felt really added to the authenticity of the book. And yeah, like I said, it just felt like such a vibrant book, full of passion and this dancing underground scene. I just thought it was amazing. Such a unique and well-written book, so love this one. Then at number 4, we have Trespasses by Louise Kennedy, and this book is about the Troubles in Ireland. It is centred around a woman named Kushla, who lives with her mum, and Kushla ends up having an affair with this older man named Michael. And Michael is a Protestant barrister who defends members of the IRA, which puts him in great danger amongst the rising violence in Ireland at the time. And all Kushla wants to do throughout this whole story is protect people that she loves. And it proves to be very, very difficult in this very violent and destructive setting. I think this book was so successful because it really shone a light on just how much the Troubles affected people on an everyday basis and just how violent and destructive they were. This book was so devastating, and there were so many points in this book where I felt like I could have cried. It was so sad. And Kushla is such a lovable character that you just feel for her so much. I think one thing that I've loved so much about reading this long list is there's been such a wide range of subject matters, and this one was no different. I've just found it so interesting reading about all these wide range of things and events and places. I found it so interesting to read about the Troubles, and it gave a real human element to it, and just you really saw how it did affect people on an everyday basis. So I thought this book was really hard-hitting and yeah, really successful. I absolutely loved it. So now we are in the top 3, my creme de la creme. So at number 3, we have Glory by No Violet Bulawayo. And this book is inspired by the fall of Zimbabwe's president, Robert Mugabe, in 2017. But this book uses purely animals to depict every single character in this book. This book is set in a fictional country called Jadada, where the people are ruled by a corrupt government. I feel there's a common theme between some of my favourite books. They are just so devastating. The people in this book face so many awful things, such oppression, poverty, genocide. Like, it is a heartbreaking book, all because of these rigged elections. And I feel like No Violet uses this satire and uses the animals to sort of make this devastating book a bit more digestible for the reader. And I think it works really well. She also really experiments with not only her characters with writing them as animals, but also her form. I feel like she uses so much repetition in this book. Like, there'll be full pages of her repeating the same word over and over and over. And I feel like that really gives the reader time to sort of sit and digest what is being said and the story and the things that are happening, and just really take in the brutality of it all and the absolute horror that are these people's lives. Because we are shown a government that absolutely abuses their power, but also a society that continues to fight for their freedom and fight for the ones they love, rising up against this oppression, which I found super inspiring and moving. These people or these animals that are barely able to survive but still continue to fight for what is right and fight against these oppressors. I absolutely love this book. It made me so angry and so passionate, but I thought it was amazing. And if you liked Animal Farm by George Orwell, then I'm sure you'll love this one as well. Next up, in second place, this was so hard to decide between the top two because I honestly thought they were both amazing. But coming in at number 2 is Black Butterflies by Priscilla Morris. And I think this has to be one of the saddest books I have ever read in my entire life, but it was so amazing. And this is going to be a book that I am going to think about for a very long time. For ages afterwards, I just could not stop thinking about these characters and this story. It is about the civil war in Bosnia in the 90s, and it is centered around this art teacher called Zora, who is separated from her husband as he goes to visit their daughter and granddaughter in England. So Zora is left in Bosnia by herself in her town of Sarajevo, I think that's how you say it. And it is the most heartbreaking book. It shows the absolute destruction of her town, her whole life where she lives, and how she becomes trapped in this place with her neighbours and people that she sees on an everyday basis. They are thrust into this absolutely devastating and harrowing environment where they cannot escape. I feel like a lot of the time when we see stuff like this on the news, it's almost hard to imagine or comprehend what's actually going on, but I feel like the author in this book did not hold back and really showcased how devastating war is for the people who find themselves living in these danger zones. It's just absolutely unbelievable how much devastation it causes, and I found it so fascinating how these people learn to deal with it in their everyday life and sort of live around it in a way. Zora, our main character, who's got this normal, amazing life that she loves, is then forced to live in these conditions that you couldn't even imagine. But through all the human connections that you form and the bonds that you form through this trauma are so strong, and I love that element of it as well. It was just an incredible book, and I found it so moving. I think especially with everything that's going on in the news at the minute, I found it especially hard-hitting, and it really made me dwell on these environments. But it was just so beautifully written, so heartbreaking, and a real test of human perseverance and survival mode. And just, I really recommend that everyone read this book because I just found it amazing, and Priscilla Morris is definitely going to be on my radar now for authors to look out for. And at number 1, like I said, this was such a hard decision, but at number 1 is The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. And I think what made this number 1 was just the feeling that I had when I read it. As I was reading it, I was like, I am just enjoying this so much. It was such a different book for me, and I just really enjoyed it. I think Maggie O'Farrell is a firm favourite of mine. I absolutely loved her book Hamnet. So I was almost not even surprised I love this book so much because I find her writing so engaging. Right from the offset, I was so hooked in the story. This book is actually based on a true story. It's set in the 1500s, and it's about a girl called Lucrezia, who is the daughter of a duke. And she is forced to marry this man at a very young age. I think she is 16. So she's very young. She does not want to marry this man. And within a year of being married to this man, she is found dead. Many say it was a short illness, but many people believe that her husband killed her. So this is sort of Maggie O'Farrell's version of what could have happened. And I think knowing from the outset that Lucrezia dies really adds such tension to the book. And I was racing through the book like I needed to know what happened. I just loved the setting of this. It was set in Tuscany and other areas in Italy, and I don't think I've read any books set in the 1500s before, so I really enjoyed that. I loved Lucrezia. I loved watching her from a young girl form into a woman, and it just shows how determined and stubborn she is in the best way possible, and her fight for survival. I just love this book. I love the fact that it was set on a true story, because it does make you think, like, I actually wonder what happened. So I just thought this was such a success. I highly recommend it. I just love Maggie O'Farrell so much. But like I said, it was so hard to pick my winner because all these books were truly so amazing. I think you got the gist that there was loads of really devastating books in there, but really important books covering so many important topics and events. And I think there are just so many talented women authors out there that I felt so privileged to be able to read all of these books. So I hope you enjoyed my list. Do let me know if you've read any of the books, ones that you enjoyed or didn't enjoy. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in my next one.